Happy New Year, Who Dat Nation. As we roll into 2026, everybody talks about resolutions, getting in shape, saving more money, being more disciplined. But the New Orleans Saints have, I think, one resolution that has to be on the very top of their list: get Chris Olave locked up long term and do it without dragging this team back into cap hell. In today's video, we're breaking down why extending Olave this offseason is the most important move the Saints can make and how it fits into the 2026 and 2027 salary cap picture, respectively, and why his connection with Tyler Shuck is just too valuable to mess around with. If you want to know why the Saints should keep their true number one wide receiver in the black and gold for the long haul, stick around because the numbers on the field and the spreadsheet both point to the same answer. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So we have to start with talking about the salary cap, which is never really fun, but it's always important. We kind of have to zoom out and take a look at the big picture with the Saints salary cap because this is what's going to make these decisions really interesting. For 2026, the Saints are currently projected to be about 11 million over the cap. Projected, still waiting on some variables to come in. We'll know more as March approaches, but it's looking like same old story, right? We're getting used to the restructures, the conversions, squeezing dollars just to get compliant. However, look, 11 million is significantly closer to compliance than we've been in years. Tens, 50, 100 million over in the last few years. 11 doesn't seem like that much of a daunting task. But while it's not going to be excruciatingly painful, it's still going to cause you some limits. Now, here's the bigger twist and the kind of the really good news. As long as the Saints remain fiscally responsible, 2027, this team is projected, and again, this is very loosely projected because the way variables and things can change in over a year's time. But they're on pace right now to be over 100 million above the cap. That's unheard of. So the reset button has been hit, and it looks like it's going to come to fruition. It should come to fruition in 2027. So this is kind of the last tight belt year we're going to have while we're trying to get the rebuild finished. And if the wallet's going to finally open up in 2027, you can be a little creative. In the case of Olave specifically, it seems right now that the market value for his contract, if we're going to extend him right now, 4 years, $100 million, roughly 25 million a year. I read somewhere maybe 60% guaranteed, maybe a little higher than that. And that's going to kind of depend on the structure. But you can use a little strategy here, knowing you're going to have well over 50%. That I think everybody can agree of guaranteed money on that contract. Being able to structure where some of that shows up in 2027 and not 2026 gives you a little pressure relief in the current year coming up that we're starting, knowing we've got a little more room in 2027, but you don't want to use it all, borrow it against it like we have been doing, and put yourself right back in cap hell. Even with restructuring Olave's deal in that area of 100 million for 4 years, um, you're probably limited to no splashy top of the market free agents this year. And even if you would grab one, you're probably looking at doing the exact same thing that you're going to think about doing with Olave's contract, some guaranteed money that's going to hit in 2027. And that goes into, we don't want to get back into putting ourselves in salary cap hell now that we're less than 2 years away from getting completely out of it with a lot of room to spare. So you may have to look at free agency down a little bit off the elite top end players of which you're going to need. And so you're going to shopping more in the solid starter, get some real value. It's kind of what we had to do last year. But guard and defensive line are two areas we do need to bring some talent in free agency, and that could be still a little bit tricky with Olave getting an extension. So it really comes down to, do you prioritize your I'm gonna go say, hey, he's the clear number one receiver, and keeping your offense stable as much as you can, and more importantly, keeping your young quarterback stocked with some weapons. And he's a big part of what they've been doing this year, as we'll look in the numbers in a minute and explain it. But if you don't do that, then yeah, you can keep the flexibility to go get a big name free agent in 2026 and then risk dragging this whole thing out with Olave as he gets closer to free agency in 2027. Look, given where the roster is, especially you have a young quarterback and a young left tackle that you drafted last year, that if you have your starting quarterback and starting left tackle coming out of the same draft, that's a big leg up. And I think the cap numbers in that situation argue for getting the extension done this year. Keep your core building with these players. And I think we need to go ahead and talk about why Olave is absolutely part of that core. So if you're talking about a wide receiver, obviously we're talking about production. In his career so far through week 16, as I'm filming this video, so Sunday's Titans game is not included in this. He's got 54 games, 435 targets, 283 receptions, 3,611 yards, 18 touchdowns, 12.8 yards per catch average. So, look, that's more than solid starter production. That's legit wide receiver one territory. Now, admittedly, it's not quite elite wide receiver territory. So, I think that's kind of where they're looking at that 25 million a year, 4 year kind of market value for his contract, falling in with one of the names that gets mentioned a lot is Devonta Smith. I think you're kind of in that sweet spot. Now, talking about 2025 through 16 weeks, 15 games because of the bye week. He's played in every game. He's got 140 targets, 1,044 yards, 8 touchdowns, 11.3 yards per reception. But where it gets interesting is when you look at the split of 8 games with Rattler's the starter, and then the 7 games with Chuck. So weeks 1 through 8, in those 8 games, 32 receptions, 403 yards, 3 touchdowns, 12.6 yards per catch. From week 9 to week 16, 7 games, 40 receptions, 541 yards, 5 touchdowns, 13.5 yards per catch. So once Shuck took over, the receptions kind of went up some, more yards definitely went up, touchdowns, a couple more. But I think the big one that jumps out and kind of correlates all this is that it's nearly a yard more average per catch, basically 9 tenths of a yard difference, kind of coinciding with the fact the air yards and the fact that Shuck can really push the ball down the field looking to, and that is getting into Olave's wheelhouse. You know, he's not really a shake and bake yards after catch guy. He's not a power receiver. He's a guy that is downfield, especially in the intermediate routes and some deep routes where he's going to get open, and you need a quarterback that can force the ball down in there to him. That's where he's going to make his plays and get his yards. And really, in a short period of time, starting to see some chemistry, I feel like, develop between the two in that area. Because when you look at their layer, um, not the layer, excuse me, when you look at the route and passing charts that are kind of popular, where they break down between the hashes, outside, long, plus 20 yards, intermediate, 10 to 19 yards. When you start breaking down those, you start to see that there's a really good alignment in Olave's production and Chuck's QB rating in these games that they played. Because Olave's top production areas over his career basically have been deep middle between the hashes plus 20, intermediate middle between the hashes 10 to 19, deep right plus 20, and short middle 0 to 9 yards. So he works a lot in the middle of the field, obviously, and that intermediate and deep routes are popping up. When you look at Chuck's numbers for this year, his QB ratings in each of those quadrants, well, deep middle, which was Olave's best production, he's only had Chuck surprisingly only thrown 3 targets in there, or had 3 passes thrown in there to targets. 67.4 QB rating. That's an area we'd like to see improve, especially since that's one of Olave's most productive areas. But in intermediate middle, Olave's number two. Shuck, that's his best QB rating, 127.7. Left intermediate, Olave's third best production area. Shuck's second best QB rating, 118.8. Deep right, 81.7 QB rating for Shuck, and that's Olave's fourth area. And look, that's not a bad number to have, throwing the ball 20 plus down the right sideline. And in that short and middle area, um, 101.7 QB rating and lining up with, and I was surprised to find that Olave gets so much production in that short middle, but then thinking about kind of those slants and those shallow crosses, he is good at that also. So Olave's bread and butter areas line up almost perfectly with where Shuck is at his best. Um, their top numbers are definitely crossing a lot of areas. It's real chemistry and fit that can develop there, and I think it has in only the course of really 7 games with them being together. So when you start looking at, you know, wide receivers top production and that quarterback's top QB ratings kind of intersecting like they are so far, like I don't think you want to gamble with that. I think you want to invest in it. And I think this is one of the biggest reasons, especially looking at those numbers. I'm thinking, yeah, you want to get this deal done with Olave. You don't want to drag it out. And especially since this is only happening over half a season, 7 games, where you're kind of seeing this, and I'm trying to imagine what it could look like for 17 games, a course of a whole season, and anything beyond that. And I'm of the mindset you absolutely have to get this done this offseason. Extending Chris Olave in the 2026 preseason, yeah, that will, or offseason rather, this will tighten things up for one more year. And it probably means you're not shopping at the absolute best top shelf in free agency this year. And guard and interior defensive line are two areas where you probably need to do it. But if you're not careful with it, you're going to start pushing more money in the future or borrowing money against the future. Basically, that's how we got into cap hell in the first place. So you definitely want to guard against that. But one thing I'm looking at about free agency, in my mind, you're not going to find a wide receiver I don't think as good as Olave for anything other than what the market is going to be paying Olave. Um, so your option would be then kind of to pay somebody else to do it, which doesn't make any sense. The same amount of money to come in, or drafting a rookie wide receiver. That's always an option. And there's a couple really good ones. It looks like on the high end of this draft. But you're gambling that a guy can walk in and instantly replace the chemistry in Olave, the chemistry of Olave and Chuck just have kind of been building over the last 7 games. Now you got it to happen to once, so you could probably get it to happen again. But you know, do you really catch that lightning in the bottle a second time where somebody's just going to walk in and it's going to mesh like this? I think you can get this deal done and not have to worry about answering any of those questions. And Johnson's under contract for a while now. So that his top two targets that he's really meshed with over 7 games are going to be around for a while. And I think that's very, very important. And you still have going to have some room to attack. Now you're going to have to be smart about it. But looking at starting level guards that you could fit in 2026, and maybe if you're reasonable and don't go overboard, kind of do the same similar. Well, that guarantee show up in 2027 because we know we're going to have a lot of space there. Regardless, the focus should be keep building offensive line depth. Um, Finding a starting caliber guard would be wonderful, but definitely keeping that depth. And some of that depth may actually already be on your roster. I think Luke Fortin has done a very admirable job backing up at center. Probably going to want to look to keep him in the stable of your offensive line, and it's probably going to be pretty reasonable to do it. So there's going to be some opportunities there, but the big elite splash, you're going to have to move on from Olave, I would think, to have any real shot at that. And I think re-signing him would be a lot of splash in my opinion. The foundation in 2025 that you established with Chuck and Banks, and I just keep looking at that going, how many teams, if we're fortunate enough that this is going to work out like we we're hoping, and it's sending us good signs that it will. How many teams in one draft we have our quarterback of the future and we have a left tackle to anchor that offensive line for the future in the building on the same rookie deals the same year? If you do that, you've cut a lot of time off the rebuild. And I think you have to lean into that. In the offensive line, yes. But any pieces that you have in receivers, one of them. Our whole entire receiving room's under contract right now. You bring Olave back and then you keep building out of that core that you've already had in the building. And a big part of that is keeping Olave in the building. So to me, priority number one has to be to keep that wide receiver in the building, Chris Olave, in his prime, paired with that young quarterback, and start working around building around Kelvin Banks Jr., Flog on the other side, but let's not forget him. So, the Saints to me is the 2026 New Year's resolution. It's simple: extend Chris Olave, protect Tyler Shuck with a functional offensive line, and keep building this foundation with the goal and mindset we're clearing cap in 2027, and whatever we haven't been able to develop from these first two draft classes and some of these free agents in, now we have the ability to go out and really start filling the holes. That's a plan going forward. And I think the resolution is let's get it done right now in 2026 with Olave. So if you're riding with Olave and Chuck is the future of the offense, hey, drop a pay that man in the comments below. You know, Let me know. Would you rather lock up Olave now or chase a big free agent in 2026 and then risk either losing him or having to deal with him in that final year of his contract where it could be a lot less stable, the numbers, than they are now? And I think you could make a strong argument to go that route, but in my mind, I think the better argument is stick with Olave and get that contract extension done. So, first time here, like what you saw, please give me a like and a share and a subscribe. I hope everyone has had a safe and happy New Year so far, and it continues to be safe and happy for the rest of the year. So, and be on the lookout for the Final Saints film room for 2025 season next week. Um, Anticipate seeing that Monday or Tuesday. And until then, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.